You may be able to notice above me up here that there is a small disclaimer that says this text contains derogatory racial terms and sexist attitudes that are offensive to modern audiences. And that's because the text that Mark Twain wrote contains derogatory racist terms and sexist attitudes that are offensive to modern audiences. Chapter 9.
I wanted to go and look at a place right about the middle of the island that I'd found when I was exploring. So we started and soon got to it, because the island was only 3 miles long and a quarter of a mile wide. This place was tolerable long, steep hill or ridge about 40 foot high. We had a rough time getting to the top. The sides was so steep and the bushes so thick. We tramped and clumb all over it, and by found a good big cavern in a rock, most up to the top on the side towards Illinois. The cavern was as big as 2 or 3 rooms bunched together, and Jim could stand up straight in it. It was cool in there. Jim was for putting our traps in there right away, but I said we didn't want to be climbing up and down there all the time. Jim said if we had the canoe hid in a good place and had all the traps in the cavern, we could rush there if anybody was to come to the island, and they would never find us without dogs. And besides, he said them little birds had said it was going to rain, and did I want the things to get wet? So we went back and got the canoe and paddled up abreast the cavern and lugged all the traps up there. Then we hung up a place close by to hide the canoe in, amongst the thick willows. We took some fish off of the lines and set them again and begun to get ready for dinner. The door of the cavern was big enough to roll a hogshead in, and on one side of the door the floor stuck out a little bit and was flat and a good place to build a fire on, so we built it there and cooked dinner. We spread the blankets inside for a carpet and eat our dinner in there. We put all the other things handy at the back of the cavern. Pretty soon it darkened up and begun to thunder and lightning, so the birds was right about it. Directly it begun to rain, and it rained like all fury too, and I never seen the wind blow so. It was one of these regular summer storms. It would get so dark that it looked all blue-black outside and lovely, and the rain would thrash along by so thick that the trees a little ways off looked dim and spiderwebby. And here would come a blast of wind that would bend the trees down and turn up the pale undersides of the leaves, and then a perfect ripper of a gust would follow along and set the branches to toss in their arms as if they was just wild. And next, when it was just about the bluest and blackest, it was as bright as glory, and you'd have a little glimpse of treetops plunging about away off yonder in the storm, hundreds of yards further than you could see before, dark as sin again in a second. And now you'd hear the thunder let go with an awful crash, and then go rumbling and grumbling and tumbling down the sky towards the underside of the world, like rolling empty barrels down the stairs, where it's long stairs and they bounce a good deal, you know. Jim, this is nice, I says. I wouldn't want to be nowhere else but here. Pass me along another hunk of fish and some hot cornbread.
Well, you wouldn't have been here if it hadn't been for Jim. You'd have been down in the woods without any dinner and getting most drowned too, that you would, honey. Chickens knows when it's going to rain, and so do the birds, child. The river went on raising for 10 or 12 days, till at last it was over the banks. The water was 3 or 4 feet deep on the island in the low places and on the Illinois bottom. On that side it was a good many miles wide, but on the Missouri side it was the same old distance across, a half a mile, because the Missouri shore was just a wall of high bluffs. Daytimes we paddled all over the island in the canoe. It was mighty cool and shady in the deep woods, even if the sun was blazing outside. We went winding in and out amongst the trees, and sometimes the vines hung so thick we had to back away and go some other way. Well, on every old broken down tree you could see rabbits and snakes and such things, and when the island had been overflowed a day or two, they got so tame on account of being hungry that you could paddle right up and put your hand on them if you wanted to, but not the snakes and the turtles. They would slide off in the water.
The ridge our cabin was on was full of them. We could have had pets enough if we'd wanted them. One night we catched a little section of a lumber raft, nice pine planks. It was 12 foot wide and about 15 or 16 foot long, and the top stood above water 6 or 7 inches, a solid level floor. We could see saw logs go by in the daylight sometimes, but we let them go. We didn't show ourselves in the daylight. Another night, when we was up at the head of the island just before daylight, here comes a frame house down on the west side. She was a 2-story and tilted over considerable. We paddled out and got aboard, clumb in an upstairs window, but it was too dark to see yet, so we made the canoe fast and set in her to wait for daylight. The light begun to come down before we got to the foot of the island. Then we looked in at the window. We could make out a bed and a table and 2 old chairs and lots of things around up out on the floor, and there was clothes hanging against the wall. There was something laying on the floor in the far corner that looked like a man. So Jim says, "Hello, you," but he didn't budge, so I hollered again, and Jim says, "The man ain't asleep. He's dead. You hold still. I'll go and see." He went and bent down and looked and says, "It's a dead man. Yes, indeedy. Naked, too. He's been shot in the back. I reckon he's been dead 2 or 3 days. Come in, Huck, but don't look at his face. It's too ghastly." I didn't look at him at all. Jim throwed some old rags over him, but he needn't done it. I didn't want to see him. There was heaps of old greasy cards scattered around over the floor, and old whiskey bottles, and a couple of masks made out of black cloth, and all over the walls was the ignorantest kind of words and pictures made with charcoal. There was 2 old dirty calico dresses and a sunbonnet, and some women's underclothes hanging against the wall, and some men's clothing, too. We put the lot into the canoe. It might come good. There was a boy's old speckered straw hat on the floor. I took that, too, and there was a bottle that had milk in it, and it had a rag stopper for a baby to suck. We would have took the bottle, but it was broke. There was a seedy old chest and an old hair trunk with the hinges broke. They stood open, but there wasn't nothing left in them that was any account. The way things was scattered about, we reckoned the people left in a hurry and weren't fixed so as to carry off most of their stuff. We got an old tin lantern and a butcher knife without any handle, and a brand new Barlow knife worth 2 bits in any store, and a lot of tallow candles and a tin candlestick and a gourd and a tin cup and a ratty old bed quilt off the bed, and a reticule with needles and pins and beeswax and buttons and thread and all such truck in it, and a hatchet and some nails and a fish line as thick as my little finger with some monstrous hooks on it, and a roll of buckskin and a leather dog collar and a horseshoe and some vials of medicine that didn't have no label on them. And just as we was leaving, I found a tolerable good curry comb, and Jim, he found a ratty old fiddle bow and a wooden leg. The straps was broken off of it, but barring that, it was a good enough leg, though it was too long for me and not long enough for Jim, and we couldn't find t'other one, though we hunted all around. And so, taking all around, we made a good haul. When we was ready to shove off, we was a quarter of a mile below the island, and it was pretty broad day, so I made Jim lay down in the canoe and cover up with the quilt, because if he set up, people could tell he was a nigger a good ways off. I paddled over to the Illinois shore and drifted down most half a mile doing it. I crept up the dead water under the bank and hadn't no accidents and didn't see nobody. We got home all safe. Chapter 10. After breakfast, I wanted to talk about the dead man and guess out how he come to be killed, but Jim didn't want to. He said it would fetch bad luck, and besides, he said he might come and haunt us. He said a man that warn't buried was more likely to go a-haunting around than one that was planted and comfortable. That sounded pretty reasonable, so I didn't say no more, but I couldn't keep from studying over it and wishing I knowed who shot the man and what they done it for. We rummaged the clothes we'd got and found $8 in silver sewed up in the line of an old blanket overcoat. Jim said he reckoned the people in that house stole the coat, because if they'd have knowed the money it was there, they wouldn't have left it. I said I reckoned they killed him, too, but Jim didn't want to talk about that. I says, Now you think it's bad luck, but what did you say when I fetched in the snakeskin that I found on the top of the ridge day before yesterday? You said it was the worst bad luck in the world to touch a snakeskin with my hands. Well, here's your bad luck. We've raked in all this truck and $8 besides. I wish we could have some bad luck like this every day, Jim.
Never you mind, honey, never you mind. Don't you get too pert. It's a-comin'. Mind I tell you, it's a-comin'.
It did come, too. It was a Tuesday that we had that talk. Well, after dinner Friday, we was laying around in the grass and at the upper end of the ridge and got out of tobacco. I went to the cavern to get some and found a rattlesnake in there. I killed him and curled him up on the foot of Jim's blanket, ever so natural, thinking there'd be some fun when Jim found him there. Well, by night I forgot all about the snake, and when Jim flung himself down on the blanket, while I struck a light, the snake's mate was there and bit him. He jumped up yelling, and the first thing the light showed was the varmint curled up and ready for another spring. I laid him out in a second with a stick, and Jim grabbed Pap's whiskey jug and began to pour it down. He was barefoot, and the snake bit him right on the heel. That all comes of my being such a fool as to not remember that wherever you leave a dead snake, its mate always comes there and curls around it. Jim told me to chop off the snake's head and throw it away, and then skin the body and roast a piece of it. I done it, and he eat it, and said it would help cure him. He made me take off the rattles and tie them round his wrist, too. He said that would help. Then I slid out quiet and throwed the snakes clear away amongst the bushes, for I warn't going to let Jim find out it was all my fault, not if I could help it. Jim sucked and sucked at the jug, and now and then he got out of his head and pitched around and yelled, but every time he come to himself he went to sucking at the jug again. His foot swelled up pretty big, and so did his leg, but by and by the drunk begun to come, and so I judged he was all right. But I'd druther been bit with a snake than Pap's whiskey. Jim was laid up for 4 days and nights. Then the swelling was all gone, and he was round again. I made up my mind I wouldn't ever take a holt of a snake skin again with my hands, now that I see what had come of it. Jim said he reckoned I would believe him next time, and he said that handling a snake skin was such awful bad luck that maybe we hadn't got to the end of it yet. He said he'd druther see the new moon over his left shoulder as much as 1,000 times than take up a snake skin in his hand. Well, I was getting to feel that way myself, though I've always reckoned that looking at the new moon over your left shoulder is one of the carelessest and foolishest things a boy can do. Old Hank Bunker done it once and bragged about it, and in less than 2 years he got drunk and fell off the shot tower and spread himself out so that he was just a kind of a lair, as you may say, and they slid him edgeways between 2 barn doors for a coffin and buried him so they say, but I didn't see it. Pap told me. But anyway, it all come of looking at the moon that way, like a fool. Well, the days went along, and the river went down between its banks, and about the first thing we done was to bait one of the big hooks with a rabbit skinned and set it and catch a catfish that was as big as a man, being 6 foot 2 inches long and weighed over 200 pounds. We couldn't handle him, of course. He would have flung us into Illinois. We just sat there and watched him rip and tear around till he drowned. We found a brass button in his stomach and a round ball and lots of rubbish. We split the ball open with the hatchet, and there was a spool in it. Jim said he'd had it there a long time to coat it over so and make a ball of it. It was a fish as big as was ever catched in the Mississippi, I reckon. Jim said he hadn't ever seen a bigger one. We would have been worth a good deal over at the village. They peddle out such a fish as that by the pound in the market house there. Everybody buys some of him. His meat's as white as snow and makes a good fry. Next morning I said it was getting slow and dull and I wanted to get us stirring up some way. I said I reckoned I would slip over the river and find out what was going on. Jim liked that notion, but he said I must go in the dark and look sharp. Then he studied it over and said couldn't I put on some of them old things and dress up like a girl? That was a good notion, too. So we shortened up one of the calico gowns, and I turned up my trouser legs to my knees and got into it. Jim hitched it behind with the hooks, and it was a fair fit. I put on the sunbonnet and tied it under my chin, and then for a body to look in and see my face was like looking down a joint of stovepipe. Jim said nobody would know me, even in the daytime, hardly. I practiced around all day to get the hang of the things, and by I could do pretty well in them. Only Jim said I didn't walk like a girl, and he said I must quit pulling up my gown to get in my breeches pocket. I took notice and done better. I started up the Illinois shore in the canoe just after dark. I started across to the town from a little below the ferry landing, and the drift of the current fetched me in at the bottom of the town. I tied up and started along the bank. There was a light burning in a little shanty that hadn't been lived in for some time, and I wondered who had took up quarters there. I slipped up and peeked in at the window. There was a woman about 40-year-old in there, knitting by a candle that was on a pine table. I didn't know her face. She was a stranger, for you couldn't start a face in that town that I didn't know. Now, this was lucky, because I was weakening. I was getting afraid I had come. People might know my voice and find me out. But if this woman had been in such a little town 2 days, she could tell me all I wanted to know. So I knocked at the door and made up my mind I wouldn't forget I was a girl. Chapter 11. "Come in," says the woman, and I did. She says, "Take a cheer." I done it. She looked me all over with her little shiny eyes and says, "What might your name be?" "Sarah Williams." "Whereabouts do you live in this neighborhood?" "Nome. In Hookerville, 7 miles below. I've walked all the way here, and I'm tired out. Hungry, too, I reckon. I'll find you something." "No, I ain't hungry. I was so hungry I had to stop 2 miles below here at a farm, so I ain't hungry no more. It's what makes me so late. My mother's down sick and out of money and everything, and I come to tell my Uncle Abner Moore. He lives at the upper end of the town," she says. "I ain't never been here before. Do you know him?" "No, but I don't know everybody yet. I haven't lived here quite 2 weeks. It's a considerable ways to the upper end of town. You better stay here all night. Take off your bonnet." "Oh, no," I says. "I'll rest a little while, I reckon, and go on. I ain't afeard of the dark." She said she wouldn't let me go by myself, but her husband would be in by and maybe in an hour and a half, and she'd send him along with me. Then she got to talking about her husband and about her relations up the river and her relations down the river, and about how much better off they used to was, and how they didn't know but they'd made a mistake coming to our town instead of letting well enough alone, and so on, till I was afeard I had made a mistake coming to her to find out what was going on in the town. But by and by she dropped on to Pap and the murder, and then I was pretty willing to let her clatter right along. She told about me and Tom Sawyer finding the $6,000, only she got it 10, and was all about Pap and what a hard lot he was and what a hard lot I was, and at least she got down to where I was murdered. I says, "Who done it?" "We've heard considerable about these goings on down in Hookerville, but we didn't know who 'twas that killed Huck Finn." "Well, I reckon there's a right smart chance of people here that'd like to know who killed him. Some think old Finn done it himself." "No, is that so?" "Most everybody thought it at first. He'll never know how nigh he come to getting lynched, but before night they changed it around and judged it was done by a runaway nigger named Jim." "Why, I stopped. I reckoned I better keep still. She run on and never noticed I had put in at all. "The nigger run off the very night Huck Finn was killed, so there's a reward out for him, $300. And there's a reward out for old Finn, too, $200. You see, he come to town the morning after the murder and told about it, and was out with him on the ferryboat hunt, and right away after he up and left. Before night they wanted to lynch him, but he was gone, you see. Well, next day they found out the nigger was gone. They found out he hadn't been seen since 10 o'clock the night the murder was done. So then they put it on him, you see, and while they was full of it, next day back comes old Finn and went boo-hooing to Judge Thatcher to get money to hunt for the nigger all over Illinois with. The judge give him some, and that evening he got drunk and was all around till after midnight with a couple of mighty hard-looking strangers, and then went off with them. Well, he ain't come back since, and they ain't looking for him back till this thing blows over a little, for people think now that he killed his boy and fixed things so Folks would think robbers done it, and then he'd get Huck's money without having to bother a long time with a lawsuit. People do say he weren't any too good to do it. Oh, he's sly, I reckon. If he don't come back for a year, he'll be all right. You can't prove anything on him, you know. Everything will be quieted down then. And he'll walk in Huck's money as easy as nothing. Yes, I reckon so, ma'am. I don't see nothing in the way of it. Has everybody quit thinking the nigger done it? Oh, no, not everybody. A good many thinks he done it. But they'll get the nigger pretty soon now, and maybe they can scare it out of him. Why are they after him yet? Oh, well, you're innocent, ain't you? Does $300 lay around every day for people to pick up? Some folks think the nigger ain't far from here. I'm one of 'em, but I ain't talked it around. A few days ago, I was talking with an old couple that lives next door in the log shanty, and they happen to say hardly anybody ever goes to that island over yonder they call Jackson's Island. Don't anybody live there? Says I. No, nobody, says they. I didn't say any more, but I'd done some thinking. I was pretty near certain I'd seen smoke over there, about the head of the island, a day or two before that. So I says to myself, like as not, that nigger's hiding over there. Anyway, says I, it's worth the trouble to give him the place a hunt. I hain't seen any smoke since, so I reckon maybe he's gone. If it was him, but husband's going over to sea, him and another man. He was gone up the river, but he got back today, and I told him as soon as he got here 2 hours ago. I had got so uneasy I couldn't sit still. I had to do something with my hands, so I took up a needle off the table and went to threading it. My hands shook, and I was making a bad job of it. When the woman stopped talking, I looked up, and she was looking at me pretty curious and smiling a little. I put down the needle and thread and let on to be interested, and I was, too, and says, $300 is a power of money. I wish my mother could get it. Is your husband going over there tonight? Oh, yes. He went uptown with the man I was telling you of to get a boat and see if they could borrow another gun. They'll go over after midnight. Couldn't they see better if they was to wait till daytime? Yes, and couldn't the nigger see better, too? After midnight he'll likely be asleep, and they can slip around through the woods and hunt up his campfire all the better for the dark, if he's got one. I didn't think of that. The woman kept looking at me pretty curious, and I didn't feel a bit comfortable. Pretty soon she says, "What did you say your name was, honey?" "Mary Williams." Somehow it didn't seem to me that I said it was Mary before, so I didn't look up. Seemed to me I said it was Sarah, so I felt sort of cornered, and was afeard maybe I was looking it, too. I wished the woman would say something more. The longer she sat still and the uneasier I was. But now she says, "Honey, I thought you said it was Sarah when you first come in." "Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes'm, I did. Sarah Mary Williams. Sarah's my first name. Some calls me Sarah. Some calls me Mary." "Oh, that's the way of it?" "Yes'm." I was feeling better then, but I wished I was out of there. Anyway, I couldn't look up yet. Well, the woman fell to talking about how hard times was, and how poor they had to live, and how the rats was as free as if they owned the place, and so on and so forth. And then I got easy again. She was right about the rats. You'd see one stick his nose out of a hole in the corner every little while. She said she had to have things handy to throw at them when she was alone, or they wouldn't give her no peace. She showed me a bar of lead twisted up into a knot, and said she was a good shot with it generally, but she'd wrenched her arm a day or two ago, and didn't know whether she could throw true now. But she watched for a chance and directly banged away at a rat. But she missed him wide and said, "Ouch!" It hurt her arm so. Then she told me to try for the next one. I wanted to be getting away before the old man got back, but of course I didn't let on. I got the thing, and the first rat that showed his nose I let drive, and if he'd have stayed where he was, he'd have been a tolerable sick rat. She said that was first rate, and she reckoned I would hive the next one. She went and got the lump of lead and fetched it back, and brought along a hank of yarn which she wanted me to help her with. I held up my 2 hands, and she put the hank over them and went on talking about her and her husband's matters, but she broke off to say, "Keep your eye on the rats. You better have the lead in your lap handy." So she dropped the lump into my lap just at that moment, and I clapped my legs together on it, and she went on talking. But only about a minute. Then she took off the hank and looked me straight in the face, and very pleasant, and says, "Come now, what's your real name?" Well, what, ma'am?" "What's your real name? Is it Bill or Tom or Bob or what is it? I reckon I looked like shook like a leaf, and I didn't hardly know what to do, but I says, "Please to don't poke fun at a poor girl like me, Mum. If I'm in the way here, I'll—" "No, you won't. Set down and stay where you are. I ain't going to hurt you, and I ain't going to tell on you, nuther. You just tell me your secret and trust me. I'll keep it, and what's more, I'll help you. So you'll soul my old man if you want him to. You see, you're a runaway prentice, that's all. It ain't anything. There ain't no harm in it. You've been treated bad, and you've made up your mind to cut. Bless you, child, I wouldn't tell on you. Tell me all about it now, that's a good boy." So I said I wouldn't be no use to try to play it any longer, and I would just make a clean breast and tell her everything, but she mustn't go back on her promise. Then I told her my father and mother was dead, and the law had bound me out to a mean old farmer in the country, 30 mile back from the river, and he treated me so bad I couldn't stand it no longer. He went away to be gone a couple of days, and so I took my chance and stole some of his daughter's old clothes and cleared out. And I had been there 3 nights, coming to 30 miles. I traveled nights and hid daytimes and slept. And the bag of bread and meat I carried from home lasted me all the way, and I had a plenty. I said I believed my Uncle Abner Moore would take care of me, and so that was why I struck out for this town of Goshen. "Goshen, child? This ain't Goshen. This is St. Petersburg. Goshen's 10 mile further up the river. Who told you this was Goshen?" "Why, a man I met at daybreak this morning, just as I was going to turn into the woods for my regular sleep. He told me when the road's forked I must take the right hand, and 5 miles would fetch me to Goshen. He was drunk, I reckon. He told you just exactly wrong." "Well, he did act like he was drunk, but it ain't no matter now. I got to be moving along. I'll fetch Goshen before daylight. Hold on a minute. I'll put you up a snack to eat. You might want it." So she put me up a snack and says, "Say, when a cow's laying down, which end of her gets up first? Answer up prompt now. Don't stop or study over it. Which end gets up first?" "The hind end, Mum." "Well, then, a horse. The forward end, Mum." "Which side of a tree does the moss grow on?" North side." "If 15 cows is browsing on a hillside, how many of them eats with their heads pointed the same direction?" "The whole 15, Mum." "Well, I reckon you have lived in the country. I thought you was trying to hocus me again. What's your real name now?" "George Peters, Mum." "Well, try to remember it, George. Don't forget and tell me it's Alexander before you go, and then get out by saying it's George Alexander when I catch you. And don't go about women in that old calico. You do a tolerable poor, but you might fool men, maybe. Bless you, child, when you set out to thread a needle, don't hold the thread still and fetch the needle up to it. Hold the needle still and poke the thread at it. That's the way a woman most always does, but a man always does t'other way. And when you throw at a rat or anything, hitch yourself up a tiptoe and fetch your hand up over your head as awkward as you can, and miss your rat about 6 or 7 foot. Throw stiff-armed from the shoulder, not like there was a pivot there for it to turn on, like a girl, not from the wrist and elbow, with your arm out to one side like a boy. And mind you, when a girl tries to catch anything in her lap, she throws her knees apart. She don't clap them together the way you did when you catched the lump of lead. Why, I spotted you for a boy when you was threading the needle, and I contrived the other things just to make certain. Now trot along to your uncle, Sarah Mary Williams George Alexander Peters, and if you get into trouble, you send word to Miss Judith Loftus, which is me, and I'll do what I can to get you out of it. Keep the river road all the way, and next time you tramp, take shoes and socks with you. The river road's a rocky one, and your feet'll be in a condition when you get to Goshen, I reckon." I went up the bank about 50 yards, and then I doubled on my tracks and slipped back to where my canoe was, a good piece below the house. I jumped in and was off in a hurry. I went upstream far enough to make the head of the island and then started across. I took off the sunbonnet, for I didn't want no blinders on them. When I was about the middle, I heard the clock begin to strike. So I stops and listens. The sound come faint over the water, but clear. 11. When I struck the head of the island, I never waited to blow, though I was most winded. But I shoved right into the timber where my old camp used to be and started a good fire there on a high and dry spot. Then I jumped in the canoe and dug out for our place, 1.5 miles below, as hard as I could go. I landed and slopped through the timber up the ridge and into the cavern. There Jim laid, sound asleep on the ground. I roused him out and says, "Get up and hump yourself, Jim. There ain't a minute to lose. They're after us." Jim never asked no questions. He never said a word, but the way he worked for the next half an hour showed about how scared he was. By that time, everything we had in the world was on our raft, and she was ready to be shoved out from the willow cove where she was hid. We put out the campfire at the cavern the first thing and didn't show a candle outside after that. I took the canoe out from the shore a little piece and took a look, but if there was a boat around I couldn't see it, for stars and shadows ain't good to see by. Then we got out of the raft and slipped along down in the shade, past the foot of the island, dead still, never saying a word.
Chapter 12.
It must have been a close on to 1 o'clock when we got below the island at last, and the raft did seem to go mighty slow. If a boat was to come along, we was going to take the canoe and break for the Illinois shore, and it was well a boat didn't come along, for we hadn't ever thought to put the gun in the canoe, or a fishing line, or anything to eat. We was in rather too much of a sweat to think of so many things. It warn't good judgment to put everything on the raft. If the men went to the island, I just expect they found the campfire I built and watched it all night for Jim to come. Anyways, they stayed away from us, and if my building the fire never fooled them, it warn't no fault of mine. I played it as low down on them as I could. When the first streak of day began to show, we tied up to a towhead in a big bend on the Illinois side and hacked off cottonwood branches with the hatchet and covered up the raft with them so she looked like there had been a cave-in the bank there. A towhead is a sandbar that has cottonwoods on it as thick as harrow teeth. We had mountains on the Missouri shore and heavy timber on the Illinois side, and the channel was down the Missouri shore at that place, so we weren't afraid of anybody running across us. We laid there all day and watched the rafts and steamboats spin down the Missouri shore, and upbound steamboats fight the big river in the middle. I told Jim all about that time I had a jabbering with that woman, and Jim said she was a smart one, and if she was to start after us herself, she wouldn't sit down and watch a campfire. No, sir. She'd fetch a dog. Well, then, I said, why couldn't she tell her husband to fetch a dog? Jim said he bet she did think of it by the time the men was ready to start, and he believed they must have gone uptown to get a dog, and so they lost all that time, or else we wouldn't be here on a towhead 16 or 17 miles below the village. No, indeedy, we would be in that same old town again. So I said I didn't care what was the reason they didn't get us, as long as they didn't. When it was beginning to come back on dark, we poked our heads out of the cottonwood thicket and looked up and down and across. Nothing in sight. So Jim took up some of the top planks of the raft and built a snug wigwam to get under in a blazing weather and rainy, and to keep the things dry. Jim made a floor for the wigwam and raised it a foot or more above the level of the raft. So now the blankets and all the traps was out of reach of the steamboat waves. Right in the middle of the wigwam we made a layer of dirt about 5 or 6 inches deep with a frame around it for it to hold its place. This was to build a fire on in sloppy weather or chilly. The wigwam would keep it from being seen. We made an extra steering oar too, because one of the others might get broke or on a snag or something. We fixed up a short forked stick to hang the lantern on, because we must always light the lantern whenever we see a steamboat coming downstream to keep from getting run over. But we wouldn't have to light it up for steamboats unless we see it was in what they call a crossing, for the river was pretty high yet, very low banks, still made a little underwater, so upbound boats didn't always run the channel but hunted easy water. This second night we run between 7 and 8 hours with a current that was making over 4 miles an hour. We catched fish and talked, and we took a swim now and then to keep off sleepiness. It was kind of solemn, drifting down the big, still river, laying on our backs, looking up at the stars, and we didn't ever feel like talking loud, and it warn't often that we laughed, only a little kind of a low chuckle. We had mighty good weather as a general thing, and nothing ever happened to us at all that night, nor the next. Every night we passed towns, some of them away up on black hillsides, but nothing but just a shiny bed of lights, not a house you could see. The 5th night we passed St. Louis, and it was like the whole world lit up. In St. Petersburg they used to say there was 20 or 30,000 people in St. Louis, but I never believed it till I see that wonderful spread of lights at 2 o'clock that still night. There warn't a sound there. Everybody was asleep. Every night now I used to slip ashore towards 10 o'clock at some little village and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon or other stuff to eat, and sometimes I lifted a chicken that warn't roosting comfortable and took 'em along. Pap always said, take a chicken when you get a chance, because if you don't want 'em yourself, you can easy find somebody that does, and a good deed ain't ever forgot. I never see Pap when he didn't want the chicken himself, but that is what he used to say, anyway. Mornings before daylight I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon or a mushmelon or a pumpkin or some new corn or things of that kind. Pap always said it weren't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to pay them back sometime, but the widow said it warn't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right and Pap was partly right, so the best way would be for us to pick out 2 or 3 things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them any more. Then he reckoned it wouldn't be no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along down the river, trying to make up our minds whether to drop the watermelons or the cantaloupes or the mushmelons or what. But towards daylight we got it all settled satisfactory and concluded to drop crab apples and persimmons. We warn't feeling just right before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad the way it come out, too, because crab apples ain't ever good, and the persimmons wouldn't be ripe for 2 or 3 months yet. We shot a waterfowl now and then that got up too early in the morning or didn't go to bed early enough in the evening. Take it all round, we lived pretty high. The 5th night below St. Louis we had a big storm after midnight, with a power of thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in a solid sheet. We stayed in the wigwam and let the raft take care of itself. When the lightning glared out, we could see a big straight river ahead and high rocky bluffs on both sides. And by I says, "Hello, Jim, looky yonder." It was a steamboat that had killed herself on a rock. We was drifting straight down for her. The lightning showed her very distinct. She was leaning over with part of her upper deck above the water, and you could see every little chimbly guy clean and clear, and a chair by the big bell with an old slouch hat hanging on the back of it when the flashes come. Well, it being away in the night and stormy and all so mysterious-like, I felt just the way any other boy would have felt when I seen that wreck laying there so mournful and lonesome in the middle of the river. I wanted to get aboard of her and slink around a little and see what was there, so I says, "Let's land on her, Jim." But Jim was dead against it at first. He says, "I don't want to go fooling longer no wrack. We's doing blame well, and we better let blame well alone, as the good book says. Like as not, dey's a watchman on that wrack." "Watchman your grandmother," I says. "There ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house. And do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house such a night as this, when it's likely to break off and wash on down the river any minute?" Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. "And besides," I says, "we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Seegers, I bet you, and cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich, and get $60 a month, and they don't care a cent what things cost. You know, as long as they want it. Stick a candle in your pocket. I can't rest, Jim, till we give her a bigger rummaging. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go by this thing? Not for pie, he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure, that's what he'd call it, and he'd land on that wreck if it was his last act, and wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself, nor nothing? Why, you'd think it was Christopher Columbus discovering the kingdom. I wish Tom Sawyer was here." Jim, he grumbled a little, but give in. He said we mustn't talk any more than we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the starboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out here. We went sneaking down the slope of it to larboard in the dark towards the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon we struck the forward end of the skylight and clumb onto it, and the next step fetched us in front of the captain's door, which was open, and by Jiminy, away down through the Texas hall we see a light, and in the same second we seem to hear low voices in yonder. Jim whispered and said he was feeling powerful sick and told me to come along. I says all right and was going to start for the raft, but then I heard a voice wail out and said, "Oh, please, don't, boys. I swear I won't ever tell." Another voice said, pretty loud, "It's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want more than your share of the truck, and you've always got it, too, because you've swore if you didn't, you'd tell. But this time, you've said it just one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherousest hound in this country." By this time, Jim was gone for the raft. I was just biling with curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, and so I won't either. I'm a-going to see what's on here. So I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage and crept aft in the dark till there warn't but one stateroom betwixt me and the cross hall of the Texas. Then in there I see a man stretched on the floor and tied hand and foot, and two men standing over him, and one of them had a dim lantern in his hand, and the other one had a pistol. This one kept pointing the pistol at the man's head on the floor and saying, "I'd like to, and I order too, a mean skunk." But the man on the floor would shrivel up and say, "Oh, please don't, Bill. I hain't ever going to tell." And every time he said that, the man with the lantern would laugh and say, "'Deed you ain't. You never going to said no truer thing than that, you bet you." And once he said, "Hear him beg, and yet if we hadn't got the best of him and tied him he'd have killed us both. And what for? Just for nothing. Just because we stood on our rights, that's what for. But I lay you ain't a-going to threaten nobody any more, Jim Turner. Put up that pistol, Bill." Bill says, "I don't want to, Jake Packard. I'm for killing him, and didn't he kill old Hatfield just the same way, and don't he deserve it?" "But I don't want him killed, and I've got my reasons for it." "Bless your heart for them words, Jake Packard. I'll never forget you long as I live," says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that, but hung up his lantern on a nail and started towards where I was there in the dark, and motioned Bill to come. I crawfished as fast as I could, about 2 yards, but the boat slanted so that I couldn't make very good time. So to keep from getting run over and catched, I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The man came a-pawing along in the dark, and when Packard got to my stateroom, he says, "Here, come in here." And in he come, and Bill after him, but before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered, and sorry I come. Then they stood there with their hands on the ledge of the berth and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell where they was by the whiskey they'd been having. I was glad I didn't drink whiskey, but it wouldn't have made much difference anyway, because most of the time they couldn't have treed me because I didn't breathe. I was too scared. And besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear such talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner, and he says he'll tell, and he will. If we was to give both our shares to him now, it wouldn't make no difference after the row and the way we've served him. Sure's you're born, he'll turn state's evidence now, you hear me. I'm putting him out of his troubles." "So am I," says Packard, very quiet. "Blame it, I'd sort of begun to think he wasn't. Well then, what's all that? That's all right. Let's go and do it. Hold on a minute. I hadn't had my say yet. You listen to me. Shooting's good, but there's quieter ways if the thing's got to be done. But what I say is this. It ain't good sense to go courting around after a halter if you can get at what you're up to in some way that's just as good, and at the same time you don't bring you into no risks. Ain't that so?" "You bet it is. But how are you going to manage it this time?" "Well, my idea is this. We'll wrestle around and gather up whatever pickings we've overlooked in the staterooms, and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now I say it ain't a-going to be more than 2 hours before this wreck breaks up and washes off down the river, see? He'll be drownded and won't have nobody to blame for it but his own self. I reckon that's a considerable sight better than killing of him. I'm unfavorable to killing a man as long as you can get around it. It ain't good sense. It ain't good morals. Am I right?" Yes, I reckon you are. But suppose she don't break up and wash off.
Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we?
All right, then, come along. So they started, and I lit out all in a cold sweat and scrambled forward. It was pitch as dark as pitch there, but I said in a kind of coarse whisper, "Jim," and he answered up right at my elbow with a sort of a moan, and I says, "Quick, Jim, it ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers in yonder, and if we don't hunt up their boat, instead of drifting down the river so these fellows can't get away from the wreck, there's going to be one of them in a bad fix. But if we find their boat, we can put all of them in a bad fix. For the sheriff will get 'em. Quick, hurry. I'll hunt the larboard side, you hunt the starboard. You start at the raft and... Oh, my lordy, lordy. Raft? They ain't no raft no more. She done broke loose and gone. And
here we is." Chapter 13.
Well, I catched my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that. But it warn't no time to be sentimentering. We got to find that boat now, and had to have it for ourselves. So we went a quaking and a shaking down the starboard side, and slow work it was, too. Seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further, so scared. He hadn't hardly any strength left, he said. But I said, come on, if we get left on this wreck, we're in a fix for sure. So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas and found it, and then scrabbled along forward so till the skylight, hanging on from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross-hall door, there was a skiff, sure enough. I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second I would have been aboard her, but just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out, only about a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone, but he jerked it in again and says,
"Heave that blame lantern out of sight, Bill."
He flung a bag of something into the boat, and then got in himself and sat down. It was Packard. Then Bill, he come out and got in. Packard says in a low voice,
"All ready. Shove off."
I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters, I was so weak, but Bill says,
"Hold on. Did you go through him?"
"No."
"Didn't you?"
"No."
"So he's got his share of the cash yet." "Well, then come along. No use to take truck and leave money."
"Say, won't he suspicion what we're up to?"
"Maybe he won't. But we got to have it anyway. Come along."
So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was on the careened side, and in a half second I was in the boat, and Jim come tumbling after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak nor whisper nor hardly even breathe. When we went alongside, we went gliding swift along, dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box and past the stern. Then in a second or two more we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last sign of her, and we was safe and knowed it. When we was 300 or 400 yards downstream, we see the lantern show like a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascals had missed their boat and was beginning to understand that they was in just as much trouble now as Jim Turner was. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time that I begun to worry about the men. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I begun to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I says to myself, there ain't no telling but I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how would I like it? So I says to Jim, the first light we see we'll land 100 yards below it or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff, and then I'll go and fix up some kind of a yarn and get somebody to go for that gang and get them out of their scrape so they can be hung when their time comes. But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it began to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down, and never a light showed. Everybody in bed, I reckon. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. After a long time the rain let up, but the clouds stayed, and the lightning kept whimpering, and by a flash showed us a black thing ahead, floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad was we to get aboard of it again. We seen a light now away down to the right on shore, so I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder, which the gang had stole there on the wreck. We hustled it onto the raft in a pile, and I told Jim to float along down and show a light when he judged he had gone about 2 miles, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more showed up on the hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shore light and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by, I see it was a lantern hanging on the jackstaff of a double-hull ferry boat. I skimmed around for the watchman, a-wondering whereabouts he slept, and by I found him roosting on the bitts forward, with his head down between his knees. I gave his shoulder 2 or 3 little shoves and begun to cry. He stirred up with a kind of startlish way, and when he sees it was only me, he took a good gap and stretch, and then says, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub. What's the trouble?" I says, "Pap and Mam and Sis," and then I broke down. He says, "Oh, dang it now, don't take on so. We all has to have our troubles, and this'll come out all right. What's the matter with 'em? There. Are you the watchman of the boat?" "Yes," he says, in a kind of pretty well satisfied like it. "I'm the captain and the owner and the mate and the pilot and the watchman and head deckhand, and sometimes I'm the freight and passengers. I ain't as rich as old Jim Hornback, and I can't be so blame generous and good to Tom, Dick, and Harry as what he is, and slam around money the way he does. But I've told them many a time I wouldn't trade places with him, for, says I, a sailor's life is the life for me, and I'm derned if I'd live 2 mile out of town where there ain't nothing ever going on, not for all this spundulix and as much more on top of it," says I. I broke in and says, they're in an awful peck of trouble, and who is?" "Why, Pap and Mam and Sis and Miss Hooker, and if you'd take your ferry boat up there." "Up where? Where are they?" "On the wreck." "That wreck?" "Why, there ain't but one." "What, you don't mean the Walter Scott?" "Yes." "Good land, what are they doing there, for gracious sakes?" "Well, they didn't go there a purpose." "I bet they didn't. Why, great goodness, there ain't no chance for 'em if they don't get off mighty quick. Why, how in the nation did they ever get into such a scrape?" "Easy enough. Miss Hooker was visiting up there to the town." "Yes, Booth's Landing. Go on." "She was a-visiting there at Booth's Landing, and just in the edge of the evening she started over with her nigger woman in the horse ferry to stay all night with her at her friend's house, Miss what you may call her, I disremember her name, and they lost their steering oar and swung around and went a-floating down, stern first, about 2 mile, and saddle-bagged and on the wreck, and the ferryman and the nigger woman and the horses was all lost, but Miss Hooker, she made a grab and got aboard the wreck. Well, about an hour after dark, we come along down in our trading scow, and it was so dark we didn't notice the wreck till we was right on it, and so we saddle-bagged, but all of us was saved but Bill Whipple, and oh, he was the best critter. I most wished it had been me, I do. By George, it's the beatin'est thing I ever struck. And then what did you all do?" "Well, we hollered and took on, but it's so wide there we couldn't make nobody hear. So Pap said somebody got to get ashore and get help somehow. I was the only one that could swim, so I made a dash for it. And Miss Hooker said if I didn't strike help sooner, come here and hunt up her uncle, and he'd fix the thing. I made the land about a mile below, and been fooling along ever since, trying to get people to do something. But they said, 'What, in such a night and such a current? There ain't no sense in it. Go for the steam ferry. Now, if you'll go and—'" "By Jackson, I'd like to, and blame it, I don't know, but I will. But who in the dignation's a-going to pay for it? Do you reckon your Pap?" "Why, that's all right. Miss Hooker, she told me particular that her Uncle Hornback—" "Great guns! Is he her uncle? Looky here, you break for that light over yonder way, and turn out west when you get there, and about a quarter of a mile out you'll come to the tavern. Tell him to dart you out to Jim Hornback's, and he'll foot the bill. And don't you fool around any, because he'll want to know the news. Tell him I'll have his niece all safe before he can get to town. Hump yourself now. I'm going up around the corner here to roust out my engineer." I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned a corner, I went back and got into my skiff and bailed her out, and then pulled up shore in the easy water about 600 yards and tucked myself in among some woodboats, for I couldn't rest easy till I could see the ferry boat start. But take it all around, I was feeling rather comfortable on accounts of taking all this trouble for that gang, for not many would have done it. I wished the widow knowed about it. I judged she would be proud of me for helping these rapscallions, because rapscallions is deadbeats, and deadbeats is the kind the widow and good people takes the most interest in. Well, before long, here comes the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and then I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I see in a minute there wasn't much chance for anybody being alive in her. I pulled all around her and hollered a little, but there wasn't any answer. All dead still. I felt a little bit heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it, I could. Then here comes the ferry boat, so I shoved for the middle of the river on a long downstream slant, and when I judged I was out of eye reach, I laid on my oars and took back and see her go and smell around the wreck for Miss Hooker's remainders, because the captain would know her Uncle Hornback would want them, and then pretty soon the ferry boat would give it up and went for the shore, and I laid into my work and went a-booming down the river. It did seem a powerful long time before Jim's light showed up, and when it did show, it looked like it was 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east, so we struck for an island and hid the raft and sunk the skiff and turned in and slept like dead people. Chapter 14. By and by, when we got up, we turned over the truck the gang had stole off the wreck and found boots and blankets and clothes and all sorts of other things, and a lot of books and a spyglass and 3 boxes of cigars. We hadn't ever been this rich before in neither of our lives. The cigars was prime. We laid off all the afternoon in the woods talking, and me reading the books and having a general good time. I told Jim all about what happened inside the wreck and at the ferry boat, and I said these kinds of things was adventures, but he said he didn't want no more adventures. He said that when I went in the Texas and he crawled back to get on the raft and found her gone, he nearly died, because he judged it was all up with him anyway. It could be fixed, but for if he didn't get saved, he would get drowned, and if he did get saved, whoever saved him would send him back so as to get the reward, and then Miss Watson would sell him south, sure. Well, he was right. He was almost always right. He had an uncommon level head for a nigger. I read considerable to Jim about kings and dukes and earls and such, and how gaudy they dressed and how much style they put on, and called each other your majesty and your grace and your lordship and so on, instead of mister. And Jim's eyes bugged out, and he was interested. He says, "I didn't know there was so many of them. I hain't heard about none of them Scaisley but old King Solomon, unless you count them kings that's in Packer cards. How much do a king get?" "Get?" I says. "Why, they get $1,000 a month if they want it, and they can have just as much as they want. Everything belongs to them."
Ain't that gay? And what they gonna do, Huck?
"They don't do nothing. Why, how you talk? They just sit around."
No, is that so?
"Of course it is. They just sit around, except maybe when there's a war, and then they go to the war. But other times they just lazy around or go hawking, just hawking and Shh! Did you hear a noise?" We skipped out and looked, but it warn't nothing but the flutter of a steamboat's wheel away down, coming around the point, so we come back. "Yes," says I, "and other times, when things is dull, they fuss with the Parliament, and if everybody don't go just so, he whacks their heads off, but mostly they hang around the harem."
Round a which?
"Harem.
What's the harem?"
The place where he keeps his wives. Don't you know about the harem? Solomon had one. He had about 1,000,000 wives."
Why, yes, that's so. I done forgot it. A harem's a bawdin' house, I reckon. Most likely they has rackety times in the nursery. And I reckon the wives quarrel considerable, and that crease the racket. Yes, yet they say Solomon the wisest man that ever lived. I don't take no stock in that, because why would a wise man want to live in the mids or sich blammin' all the time? No, 'deed he wouldn't. A wise man would take and build a boiler factory, and then he'd shut down the boiler factory when he want to rest.
Well, but he was the wisest man anyway, because the widow, she told me so her own self.
I don't care what the widow said. He warn't no wise man nother. He had some de dad fatches ways I ever see. Does you know about the child that he was gwine chopping too?
Yes, the widow told me all about it.
Well den, warn't that the beatin's notion in the world? You just take and look at it a minute. There's the stump there. That's one er the women. Here's you. That's the other one. I's Solomon. And this your dollar bill's the child? Before when you claims it, what does I do? Does I shun round amongst the neighborhood and find out which one of you the bill belong to, and hand it over to the right one, all safe and sound, the way that anybody that had any gumption would? No, I take and whack the bill in two, and give half in it to you, and the other half in it to the other woman. That's the way Solomon going to do with the child. Now I want to ask you, what's the use of that half a bill? You can't buy nothing with it, and what's the use of half a child? I wouldn't give a dern for 1,000,000 of them.
But hang it, Jim, you've clean missed the point, blang it. You've missed it 1,000 mile.
Who, me? Go long. Don't talk to me about your p'ints. I reckon I know the sense when I see it, and there ain't no sense in this doing such as that. Dispute warn't about half a child. Dispute was about a whole child, and the man that think he can settle a dispute about a whole child with a half child don't know nothing to come in and out the rain. Don't talk to me about Solomon, Huck. I knows him by the back.
But I tell you don't get the point.
Blame the point. I reckon I knows what I knows. And mind you, the real point is down further. It's down deeper. It lays in the way Solomon was raised. You take a man that's got only 1 or 2 children, is that man gwine to be wasteful of children? No, he ain't. He can't afford it. He know how to value 'em. But you take a man that's got about 5,000,000 children running around the house, and it's different. He as soon chop a child in two as a cat. They plenty mo. A child or two mo or less wasn't no cockinsons to a Solomon. Dad fetch 'em.
I never see such a nigger. If he got a notion in his head once, there wasn't nothing getting out it again. He was the most down on Solomon of any nigger I ever see. So I went to talking about other kings and let Solomon slide. I told about Louis XVI that got his head cut off in France a long time ago, and about how this little boy, the Dolphin, would have been a king, but they took and shut him up in jail, and some say he died there. Po' little chap. But some says he got out and got away and come to America. That's good, but he'll be pooty lonesome. They ain't no kings here, is they, Huck? No. Then he can't get no situation. What's he gwine to do? Well, I don't know. Maybe some of them gets on the police, and some of them learns people how to talk French. Why, Huck, don't the French people talk the same way we does? No, Jim, you couldn't understand a word they said. Not a single word. Well, now, I ding busted. How did that come? I don't know, but it's so. I got some of their jabber out of a book. Suppose a man was to come to you and say, "Parlez-vous Franzi?" What would you think? I wouldn't think nothing. I'd take and bust him over the head. That is, if he warn't white. I wouldn't allow no nigger to call me that. Shucks, it ain't calling you nothing. It's only saying, do you know how to talk French? Well, then why couldn't he say it? Why, he is a-saying it. That's a Frenchman's way of saying it. Well, it's a blame ridiculous way, and I don't want to hear no more about it. There ain't no sense in it. Looky here, Jim, does a cat talk like we do? No, a cat don't. Well, does a cow? No, a cow don't nuther. Does a cat talk like a cow, or a cow talk like a cat? No, they don't. It's natural and right for them to talk different from each other, ain't it? Course. And ain't it right and natural for a cat and a cow to talk different from us? Why, most surely it is. Well, then, why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that. Is a cat a man, Huck? No. Well, then there ain't no sense in a cat talking like a man. Is a cow a man, or is a cow a cat? No, she ain't either of them. Well, then, she ain't got no business.
talking like either one or the other of them. Is a Frenchman a man?
Yes.
Well, then, dad blame it, why don't he talk like a man? You answer me that.
I see it warn't no use wasting words. You can't learn a nigger to argue, so I quit.
Chapter 15.
We judged that 3 nights more would fetch us to Cairo, at the bottom of Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in, and that was what we was after. We could sell the raft and get on a steamboat and go way up the Ohio amongst the free states, and then be out of trouble. Well, the second night a fog begun to come in, and we made for a towhead to tie to, for it wouldn't do to try to run in a fog. But when I paddled ahead in the canoe with the line to make fast, there weren't anything but little saplings to tie to. I passed the line around one of them right on the edge of the cut bank, but there was a stiff current, and the raft come booming down so lively she tore it out by the roots, and away she went. I see the fog closing down, and it made me so sick and scared I couldn't budge for most half a minute, it seemed to me, and then there weren't no raft in sight. You couldn't see 20 yards. I jumped into the canoe and run back to the stern and grabbed the paddle and set her back a stroke, but she didn't come. I was in such a hurry I hadn't untied her. I got up and tried to untie her, but I was so excited my hands shook, so I couldn't hardly do anything with them. As soon as I got started, I took out after the raft, hot and heavy, right down the towhead. That was all right as far as it went, but the towhead wasn't 60 yards long, and the minute I flew by the foot of it, I shot out into the solid white fog and hadn't no more idea which way I was going than a dead man. Thinks I, it won't do to paddle. First I know I'll run into the bank or a towhead or something. I got to set still and float. And yet it's mighty fidgety business to have to hold your hands still at such a time. I whooped and listened. Away down there somewheres I hears a small whoop, and up comes my spirits. I went tearing after it, listening sharp to hear it again. The next time it come, I see I warn't heading for it, but heading away to the right of it. And the next time I was heading away to the left of it, and not gaining on it much either, for I was flying around this way and that and t'other, but it was going straight ahead all the time. I did wish the fool would think to beat a tin pan, and beat it all the time, but he never did. And it was still the places between the whoops that was making the trouble for me. Well, I fought along, and directly I hears the whoop behind me. I was tangled good now. That was somebody else's whoop, or else I was turned around. I throwed the paddle down. I heard the whoop again. It was behind me yet, but in a different place. It kept coming and kept changing its place, and I kept answering, till by and by it was in front of me again, and I knowed the current had swung the canoe's head downstream, and I was all right if that was Jim and not some other raftsman hollering. I couldn't tell nothing about voices in a fog, for nothing don't look natural nor sound natural in a fog. The whooping went on, and in about a minute I come a-booming down on a cut bank with smoky ghosts of big trees on it, and the current throwed me off to the left and shot by amongst a lot of snags that fairly roared. The current was tearing by them so swift. In another second or two it was solid white and still again. I sat perfectly still then, listening to my heart thump, and I reckon I didn't draw a breath while it thumped 100. I just give up then. I knowed what the matter was. That cut bank was an island, and Jim had gone down t'other side of it. It warn't no towhead that you could float by in 10 minutes. It had the big timber of a regular island. It might be 5 or 6 miles long and more than half a mile wide. I kept quiet, with my ears cocked, about 15 minutes, I reckon. I was floating along, of course, 4 or 5 miles an hour, but you don't ever think of that. No, you feel like you are laying dead still on the water, and if a little glimpse of a snag slips by, you don't think to yourself how fast you're going, but you catch your breath and think, my, how that snag's tearing along. If you think it ain't dismal and lonesome out in the fog that way by yourself in the night, you try it once, you'll see. Next, for about half an hour, I whoops now and then. At last I hears the answer a long ways off and tries to follow it, but I couldn't do it, and directly I judged I'd got into a nest of towheads, for I had little dim glimpses of them on both sides of me, sometimes just a narrow channel between, and Some that I couldn't see I knowed was there because I'd hear the wash of the current against the old dead brush and trash that hung over the banks. Well, I warn't long, loosing the whoops down amongst the towheads, and I only tried to chase them a little while anyway, because it was worse than chasing a jack-o'-lantern. You never knowed a sound dodged around so much and swapped places so quick and so much. I had to claw away from the bank a pretty lively 4 or 5 times to keep from knocking the islands out of the river, and so I judged the raft must be butting into the bank every now and again, or else it would get further ahead and clear out of hearing. It was floating a little faster than what I was. Well, I seemed to be in the open river again by and by, but I couldn't hear no sign of a whoop nowheres. I reckon Jim had fetched up on a snag maybe, and it was all up with him. I was good and tired, so I laid down in the canoe and said I wouldn't bother no more. I didn't want to go to sleep, of course, but I was so sleepy I couldn't help it. So I thought I would just take one little cat nap. But I reckon it was more than a cat nap, for when I waked up, the stars was shining bright. The fog was all gone, and I was spinning down a big bend stern first. First, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was dreaming, and when things began to come back to me, they seemed to come up dim out of last week. It was a monstrous big river here, with the tallest and thickest kinds of timber on both banks, just a solid wall as well as I could see by the stars. I took a way downstream and seen a black speck on the water. I took after it, but when I got to it, it warn't nothing but a couple of saw logs made fast together. Then I see another speck and chased that. Then another, and this time I was right. It was the raft. When I got to it, Jim was sitting there with his head down between his knees, asleep, with his right arm hanging over the steering oar. The other oar was smashed off, and the raft was littered up with leaves and branches and dirt, so he'd had a rough time. I made fast and laid down under Jim's nose on the raft and began to gap and stretch my fists out against Jim and says, "Hello, Jim, have I been asleep? Why didn't you stir me up?" "Goodness gracious, is that you, Huck? And you ain't dead and you ain't drowned? You's back again. It's too good for true, honey. It's too good for true. Let me look at you, child. Let me feel o' you. No, you ain't dead. You's back again. Live and sound, just the same old Huck. The same old Huck, thanks to goodness. What's the matter with you, Jim? You been a-drinking?" "Drinking? Has I been a-drinking? Has I had a chance to be a-drinking?" "Well, then, what makes you talk so wild?"
"How does I talk wild?"
"How? Why, you ain't been talking about my coming back and all that stuff as if I been gone away."
Huck Finn, you look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. Hain't you been gone away?"
"Gone away? Why, what in the nation do you mean? I hain't been gone anywheres. Where would I go to?"
"Well, looky here, boss. They's something wrong, they is. I is me, or who is I? Is I here, or where is I? Now that's what I wants to know."
"Well, I think you're here plain enough, but I think you're a tangle-headed old fool, Jim."
"I is I? Well, you answer me this. Didn't you tote out a line in the canoe for to make fast to the towhead?"
"No, I didn't. What towhead? I hain't seen no towhead."
"You hain't seen no towhead? Looky here, didn't the line pull loose and the raft go a-humming down the river and leave you in the canoe behind in the fog?"
"What fog?"
"Why, the fog. The fog that's been around all night. And didn't you whoop and didn't I whoop till we got mixed up in the islands and one on us got lost and t'other was just as good as lost 'cause he didn't know where he was? And didn't I bust up again a lot of them islands and have a terrible time and most get drowned? Now ain't that so, boss? Ain't it so? You answer me that."
"Well, this is too many for me, Jim. I ain't seen no fog, nor no islands, nor no troubles, nor nothing. I've been setting here talking with you all night till you went to sleep about 10 minutes ago, and I reckon I done the same. You couldn't have got drunk in that time, so of course you been dreaming."
"Dad fetch it. How is I going to dream all that in 10 minutes?"
"Well, hang it all, you did dream, because there didn't any of it happen."
"But, Huck, it's all just as plain to me as—"
"It don't make no difference how plain it is. There ain't nothing in it. I know, because I've been here all the time." Jim didn't say nothing for about 5 minutes, but sat there studying over it. Then he says, "Well, den, I reckon I did dream it, Huck, but dog my cats if it ain't dat the powerfulest dream I ever see. And I hain't ever had no dream before that's tired me out like this one." "Oh, well, that's all right, 'cause a dream does tire a body like everything sometimes. But this one was a staving dream. Tell me all about it, Jim." So Jim went to work and told me the whole thing right through, just as it happened, only he painted it up considerable. Then he said he must start in and interpret it, 'cause it was sent for a warning. And he said the first towhead stood for a man that would try to do us some good, but the current was another man that would get us away from him. The whoops was warnings that would come to us every now and then, and if we didn't try hard to make out to understand them, they'd just take us into bad luck instead of keeping us out of it. The lot of towheads was trouble we was going to get into with quarrelsome people of all kinds of mean folks. But if we minded our business and didn't talk back and aggravate them, we would pull through and get out of the fog and into the big clear river, which was the Free States, and wouldn't have no more trouble. It had clouded up pretty dark just after I got onto the raft, but it was clearing up again now.
Oh, well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it...
Well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it goes, Jim," I says. "But what does these things stand for?" It was the leaves and the rubbish on the raft and the smashed oar. You could see them first rate now. Jim looked at the trash and then looked at me and back at the trash again. He had got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back into its place again right away. But when he did get the thing straightened around, he looked at me steady without ever smiling and says,
"What do they stand for? I's gwine tell you. When I got all wore out with the work and with the calling for you and went to sleep, my heart was most broke because you was lost, and I didn't care no more what was become of me and the raft. And when I wake up and find you back again, all safe and sound, the tears come, and I could have got down on my knees and kissed your foot, I's so thankful. And all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. That truck is trash, and trash is what people that puts dirt on the head for they friends and makes 'em ashamed."
Then he got up slow and walked to the wigwam and went in there without saying anything but that. But that was enough. It made me feel so mean I could almost kissed his foot to get him to take it back. It was 15 minutes before I could work myself up to go and humble myself to a nigger, but I done it, and I warn't ever sorry for it afterward neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks, and I wouldn't done that one if I'd have knowed it would make him feel that way.
Chapter 16.
We slept most all day and started out at night, a little ways behind a monstrous long raft that was as long going by as a procession. She had 4 long sweeps at each end, so we judged she carried as many as 30 men, likely. She had 5 big wigwams abroad, wide apart, and an open campfire in the middle, and a tall flagpole at each end. There was a power of style about her. It amounted to something, being a raftsman on such a craft as that. We went drifting down into a big bend, and the night clouded up and got hot. The river was very wide and was walled with solid timber on both sides. You couldn't see a break in it hardly ever, or a light. We talked about Cairo and wondered whether we would know when we got to it. I said likely we wouldn't, because I had heard say there warn't but about a dozen houses there, and if they didn't happen to have them lit up, how was we going to know we was passing a town? Jim said if the 2 big rivers joined together there, that would show. But I said maybe we might think we was passing the foot of an island and coming into the same old river again. That disturbed Jim and me too. So the question was what to do. I said paddle ashore the first time a light showed, and tell them Pap was behind, coming along with a trading scow, and was a green hand at the business and wanted to know how far it was to Cairo. Jim said it was a good idea, so we took a smoke on it and waited. There warn't nothing to do now but to look out sharp for the town and not pass it without seeing it. He said he'd be mighty sure to see it, because he'd be a free man the minute he seen it. But if he missed it, he'd be in a slave country again and no more show for freedom. Every little while he jumps up and says, "There she is." But it warn't. It was jack-o'-lanterns or lightning bugs. So he sat down again and went to watching, same as before. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. Well, I can tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish, too, to hear him, because I begun to get it through my head that he was most free, and who was to blame for it? Why, me. I couldn't get that out of my conscience, no how or no way. It got to troubling me, so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. It hadn't ever come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing, but now it did, and it stayed with me and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself that I warn't to blame because I didn't run Jim off from his rightful owner, but it warn't no use. Conscience up and says every time, but you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody. That was so. I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. Conscience says to me, what had poor Miss Watson done to you, that you could see her nigger go right off under your eyes and never say one single word? What did that poor old woman do to you, that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn you your book, and she tried to learn you your manners. She tried to be good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she done. I got to feeling so mean and so miserable I almost wished I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the raft, abusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. We neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and said, "Des Cairo," it went through me like a shot, and I thought if it was Cairo, I reckoned I would die of miserableness. Jim talked out loud all the time while I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state, he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent, and when he got enough, he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived, and then they would both work to buy the 2 children, and if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. It most froze me to hear such talk. He wouldn't ever dared to talk such talk in his life before. Just see what a difference it made in him the minute he judged he was about free. It was according to the old saying, give a nigger an inch and he'll take an L. Thinks I, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this nigger, which I had as good as helped to run away, coming right out flat-footed, and saying he would steal his children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man I had never done me no harm. I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever, until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. By and by one showed. Jim sings out, "We safe, Huck, we safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's the good old Cairo at last. I just knows it." I says, I'll take the canoe and go and see Jim. It mightn't be, you know. He jumped and got the canoe ready and put his old coat in the bottom for me to set on and give me the paddle. And as I shoved off, he says, "Pooty soon I'll be a-shouting for joy, and I'll say, it's all on accounts of Huck. I is a free man, and I couldn't ever been free if it hadn't a been for Huck. Huck done it. Jim won't ever forget you. Jim won't ever forget you, Huck. You's the best friend Jim's ever had. And you's the only friend old Jim's got now." I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him, but when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. I went along slow then, and I warn't right down center whether I was glad I started or whether I warn't. I was 50 yards off. Jim says, "Dar you goes, the old true Huck, the only white gentleman that ever kept his promise to old Jim." Well, I just felt sick, but I says, I got to do it. I can't get out of it. Right then comes along a skiff with 2 men in it with guns, and they stopped and I stopped. One of them says, "What's that yonder?" "A piece of a raft," I says. "Do you belong on it?" "Yes, sir." "Any men on it?" "Only one, sir." "Well, there's 5 niggers run off tonight up yonder above the head of the bend. Is your man white or black?" I didn't answer up prompt. I tried to, but the words wouldn't come. I tried for a second or two to brace up and out with it, but I warn't man enough.
hadn't the spunk of a rabbit. I see I was weakening, so I just give up trying and says, "He's white. I reckon we'll go and see for ourselves." "I wish you would," says I, "because it's Pap that's there, and maybe you'd help me tow that raft ashore where the light is. He's sick, and so is my mam and Mary Ann." "Oh, the devil. We're in a hurry, boy, but I suppose we've got to. Come buckle to your paddle, and let's get along." I buckled to my paddle, and they laid to their oars. When we had made a stroke or two, I says, "Pap'll be mighty obleeged to you, I can tell you. Everybody goes away when I want them to help me tow the raft ashore, and I can't do it by myself." "Well, that's infernal mean. Odd, too. Say, boy, what's the matter with your father?" "It's the... well, it ain't anything much." They stopped pulling. It warn't but a mighty little ways to the raft now. One says, "Boy, that's a lie. What is the matter with your pap? Answer up square now, and it'll be the better for you." "I will, sir, I will, honest. But don't leave us, please. It's the gentleman. If you'll only pull ahead and let me heave you the headline, you won't have to come near the raft. Please do." "Set her back, John, set her back," says one. They backed the water. "Keep away, boy. Keep to leeward." "Confound it, I just expect the wind has blowed it to us. Your pap's got the smallpox, and you know it precious well. Why didn't you come out and say so? Do you want to spread it all over?" "Well," I says, a blubbering, "I've told everybody before, and they just went away and left us." Poor devil. There's something in that. We are right down sorry for you, but well, hang it. We don't want the smallpox, you see. Look here, I'll tell you what to do. Don't try to land by yourself, or you'll smash everything to pieces. You float along down about 20 miles, and you'll come to a town on the left-hand side of the river. It will be long after sunup then, and when you ask for help, you tell them your folks are all down with chills and fever. Don't be a fool again, and let people guess what is the matter. Now we're trying to do you a kindness, so you just put 20 miles between us. That's a good boy. It wouldn't do any good to land yonder where the light is. It's only a wood yard. Say, I reckon your father's poor, and I'm bound to say he's in pretty hard luck. Here, I'll put a $20 gold piece on this board, and you get it when it floats by. I feel mighty mean to leave you, but my kingdom, it won't do to fool with smallpox, don't you see?" "Hold on, Parker," says the other man. "Here's a 20 to put on the board for me. Goodbye, boy. You do as Mr. Parker told you, and you'll be all right." "That's so, my boy. Goodbye. Goodbye. If you see any runaway niggers, you get help and nab 'em, and you can make some money by it." "Goodbye, sir," says I. "I won't let no runaway niggers get by me if I can help it." They went off, and I got aboard the raft, feeling bad and low, because I knowed very well I had done wrong, and I see it warn't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothing to back him up and keep him to his work, so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute and says to myself, "Hold on. Suppose you'd done right and give Jim up. Would you feel better than what you do now?" "No," says I. "I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now." "Well, then," says I, "what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same?" I was stuck. I couldn't answer that, so I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it. But after this, always do whichever come handiest at the time. I went into the wigwam. Jim warn't there. I looked all around. He warn't anywhere. I says, "Jim, here I is, Huck. Is they out of sight yet? Don't talk loud." He was in the river under the stern oar with just his nose out. I told him they were out of sight, so he come aboard. He says, "I was a-listening to all the talk, and I slips into the river and was going shove for the show if they come aboard. Then I was going to swim to the raft again when they was gone. But lawsy, how did you fool 'em, Huck? That was the smartest dodge. I tell you, child, I expect it save old Jim. Old Jim ain't going to forget you for that, honey." Then we talked about the money. It was a pretty good raise, $20 apiece. Jim said we could deck passage on a steamboat now, and the money would last us as far as we wanted to go in the Free States. He said 20 mile more warn't far for the raft to go,
but he wished he was already there. Towards daybreak, we tied up, and Jim was mighty particular about hiding the raft good. Then he worked all day fixing things in bundles and getting all ready to quit rafting. That night, about 10, we hove in sight of the lights of a town away down in the left-hand bend. I went off in the canoe to ask about it. Pretty soon, I found a man out on the river with a skiff setting a trot line. I ranged up and said, "Mister, is that town Cairo?" "Cairo? No. You must be a blame fool. What town is it, mister?" "If you want to know, go and find out. If you stay here bothering me for around about half a minute longer, you'll get something you won't want." I paddled to the raft, and Jim was awful disappointed. But I said never mind, Cairo would be the next place, I reckoned. We passed another town before daylight, and I was going out again, but it was high ground, so I didn't go. No high ground about Cairo, Jim said. I had forgot it. We laid up for the day on a towhead tolerable close to the left-hand bank. I begun to suspicion something. So did Jim, I says. Maybe Cairo went by in the fog that night. He says, "Don't let's talk about it, Huck. Po' niggers can't have no luck. I allus suspected that rattlesnake skin warn't done with its work." I wish I'd never seen that snake skin, Jim. I do wish I'd never laid eyes on it. "It ain't your fault, Huck. You didn't know. Don't blame yourself about it." When it was daylight, here was the clear Ohio water inshore, sure enough, and outside was the regular old muddy. So it was all up with Cairo. We talked it all over. It wouldn't do to take to the shore. We couldn't take the raft up the stream, of course. There warn't no way but to wait for dark and start back in the canoe and take the chances. So we slept all day amongst the cottonwood thicket, so as to be fresh for the work, and when we went back to the raft about dark, the canoe was gone. We didn't say a word for a good while. There warn't nothing to say. We both knowed well enough it was some more work of the rattlesnake skin. So what was the use to talk about it? It would only look like we was finding fault, and that would be bound to fetch more bad luck, and keep on fetching it too, till we knowed enough to keep still. By and by we talked about what we better do, and found there warn't no way but to just go along down with the raft till we got a chance to buy a canoe to go back in. We warn't going to borrow it when there warn't anybody around, the way Pap would do, for that might set people after us. So we shoved out after dark on the raft. Anybody that don't believe yet that it's foolishness to handle a snakeskin after all that snakeskin done for us will believe it now if they read on and see what more it done for us. The place to buy canoe is off of rafts laying up at shore, but we didn't see no rafts laying up, so we went along during 3 hours and more. Well, the night got gray and rather thick, which is the next meanest thing to fog. You can't tell the shape of the river, and you can't see no distance. It got to be very late and still, and then along comes a steamboat up the river. We lit the lantern and judged she would see it. Upstream boats didn't generally come close to us. They go out and follow the bars and hunt for easy water under the reefs, but nights like this they pull right up the channel against the whole river. We could hear her pounding along, but we didn't see her good till she was close. She aimed right for us. Often they do that and try to see how close they can come without touching. Sometimes the wheel bites off a sweep, and then the pilot sticks his head out and laughs and thinks he's mighty smart. Well, here she comes, and we said she was going to try and shave us, but she didn't seem to be shearing off a bit. She was a big one, and she was coming in a hurry, too, looking like a black cloud with rows of glowworms around it. But all of a sudden she bulged out, big and scary, with a long row of wide-open furnace doors, shining like red-hot teeth, and her monstrous bows and guards hanging right over us. There was a yell at us and a jingling of bells to stop the engines, a powwow of cussing and whistling of steam, and as Jim went overboard to one side and I on t'other, she come smashing straight through the raft. I dived, and I aimed to find the bottom, too, for a 30-foot wheel had got to go over me, and I wanted it to have plenty of room. I could always stay underwater a minute. This time I reckon I stayed under a minute and a half. Then I bounced for the top in a hurry, for I was nearly busting. I popped out to my armpits and blowed the water out of my nose and puffed a bit. Of course, there was a bloomin' current, and of course the boat started her engines again 10 seconds after she stopped them, for they never cared much for raftsmen, so now she was churning up along the river, out of sight in the thick weather, though I could hear her. I sung out for Jim about a dozen times, but I didn't get any answer, so I grabbed a plank that touched me while I was treading water and struck out for shore, shoving it ahead of me. But I made out to see that the drift of the current was towards the left-hand shore, which meant that I was in a crossing, so I changed off and went that way. It was one of these long, slanting 2-mile crossings, so I was a good long time in getting over. I made a safe landing and clumb up the bank. I couldn't see but a little ways, but I went poking along over the rough ground for a quarter of a mile or more, and then I run across a big old-fashioned double log house before I noticed it. I was going to rush by and get away, but a lot of dogs jumped out and went to howling and barking at me, and I knowed better than to move another peg. Chapter 17. In about a minute, somebody spoke out of a window without putting his head out and says, "Be done, boys. Who's there?" I says, "It's me." "Who's me?" "George Jackson, sir. What do you want?" "I don't want nothing, sir. I only want to go along by, but the dogs won't let me." "What are you prowling around this time of night for, hey?" "I weren't prowling around, sir. I fell overboard off the steamboat." "Oh, you did you? Strike a light there, somebody." "What did you say your name was?" "George Jackson, sir. I'm only a boy." "Look here, if you're telling the truth, you needn't be afraid. Nobody'll hurt you, but don't try to budge. Stand right where you are. Roust out Bob and Tom, some of you, and fetch the guns." "George Jackson, is there anybody with you?" "No, sir, nobody." I heard the people stirring around in the house and see a light. The man sung out, "Snatch that light away, Betsy, you old fool. You ain't got any sense. Put it on the floor behind the front door. Bob, if you and Tom are ready, take your places." "All ready." "Now, George Jackson, do you know the Shepherdsons?" "No, sir, I never heard of them." "Well, that may be so, and maybe it ain't. Now, all ready. Step forward, George Jackson, and mind, don't you hurry. Come mighty slow. If there's anybody with you, let him keep back. If he shows himself, he'll be shot. Come along now. Come slow. Push the door open yourself. Just enough to squeeze in, do you hear?" I didn't hurry. I couldn't if I'd wanted to. I took one slow step at a time, and there warn't a sound, only I thought I could hear my heart. The dogs were as still as the humans, but they followed a little behind me. When I got to the 3 log doorsteps, I heard 'em unlocking and unbarring and unbolting. I put my hand on the door and pushed it a little and a little more until somebody said, "There, that's enough. Put your head in." I done it, but I judged they would take it off. The candle was on the floor, and there they all was, looking at me at them for about a quarter of a minute. 3 big men with guns pointed at me, which made me wince, I'll tell you. The oldest, gray and about 60, and the other 2, 30 or more, all of 'em fine and handsome, and the sweetest old gray-headed lady, and a back of her 2 young women I couldn't right well see. The old gentleman says, "There, I reckon it's all right. Come in." As soon as I was in, the old gentleman, he locked the door and barred it and bolted it and told the young men to come in with their guns, and they all went in a big parlor and had a new rag carpet on the floor and got together in a corner that was out of the range of the front windows. There warn't none on the side. They held the candle and took a good look at me and said, "Why, he ain't a Shepherdson. No, there ain't any Shepherdson about him." Then the old man said he hoped I wouldn't mind being searched for arms, because he didn't mean no harm by it, and it was only to make sure. So he didn't pry into my pockets, but only felt outside with his hands, and said it was all right. He told me to make myself easy and at home, and tell all about myself. But the old lady says, "Why, bless you, Saul, the poor thing's as wet as he can be, and don't you reckon it may be he's hungry?" "True for you, Rachel. I forgot." So the old lady says, "Betsy," this was a nigger woman, "you can fly around and get him something to eat as quick as you can, poor thing, and one of you girls go and wake up Buck and tell him. And oh, here he is himself, Buck. Take this little stranger and get the wet clothes off from him, and dress him up in some of yours that's dry." Buck looked about as old as me, 13 or 14 or along there, but he was a little bigger than me. He hadn't on anything but a shirt, and he was very frowsy-headed. He came in, gapping and digging one fist into his eyes, and he was dragging a gun along with the other one. He says, "Ain't they no Shepherdsons around?" They said no, 'twas a false alarm. "Well," says he, "if they'd a been some, I reckon I'd a got one." They all laughed, and Bob says, "Why, Buck, they might have scalped us all, you been so slow in coming." "Well, nobody come after me, and it ain't right I'm always kept down. I don't get no show." "Never mind, Buck, my boy," says the old man. "You'll have show enough all in good time. Don't you fret about that. Go along with you now, and do as your mother told you." When we got upstairs to his room, he got me a coarse shirt and a roundabout and pants of his, and I put them on. While I was at it, he asked me what my name was, but before I could tell him, he started to tell me about a blue jay and a young rabbit he had catched in the woods day before yesterday, and he asked me where Moses was when the candle went out. I said I didn't know. I hadn't heard about it before, no way. "Well, guess," he says. "How am I going to guess," says I, "when I never heard tell of it before?" "But you can guess, can't you? It's just as easy." "Which candle?" I says. "Why, any candle," he says. "I don't know where he was," says I. "Where was he?" "Why, he was in the dark, that's where he was." "Well, if you'd knowed where he was, why did you ask me for?" "Why, blame it, it's a riddle, don't you see? Say, how long are you going to stay here? You've got to stay always. We can just have booming times. They don't have no school now. Do you own a dog? I've got a dog, and he'll go in the river and bring out chips that you throw in. Do you like to comb up Sundays and all that kind of foolishness? You bet I don't, but Ma, she makes me. Confound these old breeches. I reckon I'd better put them on, but I'd rather not, it's so warm. Are you all ready? All right, come along, old hoss." Cold corn pone, cold corned beef, butter, and buttermilk. That is what they had for me down there, and there ain't nothing better than I've ever come across yet. Buck and his ma and all of them smoked cob pipes, except the nigger woman, which was gone, and the two young women. They all smoked and talked, and I eat and talked. The young women had quilts around them, and their hair down their backs. They all asked me questions, and I told them how Pap and me and all the family was living on a little farm down at the bottom of Arkansas, and my sister Mary Ann run off and got married, and never was heard of no more. And Bill went to hunt them, and he warn't heard of no more, and Tom and Mort died, and then there warn't nobody but just me and Pap left, and he was just trimmed down to nothing on account of his troubles. So when he died, I took what there was left, because the farm didn't belong to us, and started up the river, deck passage, and fell overboard. And that was how I come to be here. So they said I could have a home there as long as I wanted it. Then it was most daylight, and everybody went to bed. And I went to bed with Buck, and when I waked up in the morning, drat it all, I had forgot what my name was. So I laid there about an hour, trying to think, and when Buck waked up, I says, "Can you spell, Buck?" "Yes," he says. "I bet you can't spell my name," says I. "I bet you what you dare I can," says he. "All right," I says, "go on ahead." "Georgjackson. There now," says he. "Well," says I, "you done it, but I didn't think you could. It ain't no slouch of a name to spell right off without studying." I set it down private because somebody might want me to spell it next, and so I wanted to be handy with it and rattle it off like I was used to it. It was a mighty nice family, and a mighty nice house, too. I hadn't seen no house out in the country before that was so nice and had so much style. It didn't have an iron latch on the front door, nor a wooden one with a buckskin string, but a brass knob to turn, the same as houses in town. There warn't no bed in the parlor, nor a sign of a bed, but heaps of parlors in towns has beds in 'em. There was a big fireplace that was bricked on the bottom, and the bricks was kept clean and red by pouring water on them and scrubbing them with another brick. Sometimes they washed them over with red water paint that they call Spanish brown, same as they do in town. They had big brass dog irons that could hold up a saw log. There was a clock on the middle of the mantelpiece with a picture of a town painted on the bottom half of the glass front, and a round place in the middle of it for the sun, and you could see the pendulum swinging behind it. It was beautiful to hear that clock tick, and sometimes when one of these peddlers had been along and scoured her up and got her in good shape, she would start in and strike 150 before she got tuckered out. They wouldn't took any money for her. Well, there was a big outlandish parrot on each side of the clock, made out of something like chalk and painted up gaudy. By one of the parrots was a cat made of crockery, and a crockery dog by the other, and when you pressed down on them they squeaked but didn't open up their mouths nor look different nor interested. They squeaked through underneath. There was a couple of big, wild turkey wing fans spread out behind those things. On the table in the middle of the room was a kind of a lovely crockery basket that had apples and oranges and peaches and grapes piled up in it, which was much redder and yellower and prettier than real ones, but they weren't real, because you could see where pieces had got chipped off and showed the white chalk or whatever it was underneath. This table had a cover made out of beautiful oilcloth with a red and blue spread eagle painted on it and a painted border all around. It come all the way from Philadelphia, they said. There was some books, too, piled up, perfectly exact, on each corner of the table. One was a big family Bible full of pictures. One was Pilgrim's Progress, about a man that left his family, but didn't say why. I read considerable in it now and then. The statements was interesting, but tough. Another was Friendship's Offering, full of beautiful stuff and poetry, but I didn't read the poetry. Another was Henry Clay's speeches, and another one was Dr. Gunn's Family Medicine, which told you all about what to do if a body was sick or dead. There was a hymn book and a lot of other books, and there was a nice split-bottom chairs, and perfectly sound, too, not bagged down in the middle and busted like an old basket. They had pictures hung on the walls, mainly Washingtons and Lafayettes and battles and Highland Marys, and one called Signing the Declaration. There was some that they called crayons, which one of the daughters, which was dead, made her own self when she was only 15 years old. They was different from any pictures I ever seen before, blacker mostly than is common. One was a woman in a slim black dress, belted small under the armpits, with bulges like cabbage in the middle of the sleeves, and a large black scoop shovel bonnet with a black veil, and white, slim ankles crossed about with black tape, and very wee black slippers like a chisel, and she was leaning pensive on a tombstone on her right elbow under a weeping willow, and her other hand hanging down by her side holding a white handkerchief and a reticule, and underneath the picture it said, "Shall I never see thee more, alas?" Another one was a young lady with her hair all combed up straight to the top of her head, and knotted there in front of a comb like a chair back, and she was crying into a handkerchief, and had a dead bird laying on its back in her other hand with its heels up, and underneath the picture it said, "I shall never hear thy sweet chirrup more, alas." There was one where a young lady was at a window looking up at the moon, and tears running down her cheeks, and she had an open letter in one hand with black sealing wax showing on one edge of it, and she was mashing a locket with a chain to it against her mouth, and underneath the picture it said, "And art thou gone? Yes, thou art gone, alas." These was all nice pictures, I reckon, but I didn't somehow seem to take to them, because if ever I was down a little, they always give me the fantods. Everybody was sorry she died, because she had laid out a lot more of these pictures too, and a body could see by what she had done what they had lost. But I reckoned that with her disposition she was having a better time in the graveyard. She was at work on what they said was her greatest picture when she took sick, and every day and every night it was her prayer to be allowed to live till she got it done, but she never got the chance. It was a picture of a young woman in a long white gown, standing on the rail of a bridge all ready to jump off, with her hair all down her back and looking up to the moon with the tears running down her face, and she had 2 arms folded across her breast and 2 arms stretched out in front and 2 more reaching up towards the moon, and the idea was to see which pair would look best and then scratch out all the other arms. But as I was saying, she died before she got her mind made up. And now they kept this picture over the head of the bed in her room, and every time her birthday come, they hung flowers on it. Other times it was hid with a little curtain. The young woman in the picture had a kind of a nice, sweet face, but there was so many arms that made her look too spidery, seemed to me. This young girl kept a scrapbook when she was alive and used to paste obituaries and accidents and cases of patients suffering in it out of the Presbyterian Observer and write poetry after them out of her own head. It was very good poetry. This is what she wrote about a boy by the name of Stephen Dowling Botts that fell down a well and was drowned. Ode to Stephen Dowling Botts, deceased. And did young Stephen sicken, and did young Stephen die? And did the sad hearts thicken, and did the mourners cry? No, such was not the fate of young Stephen Dowling Botts. Though sad hearts round him thickened, 'twas not from sickness shots. No whooping cough did rack his frame, nor measles strear with spots. Not these impaired the sacred name of Stephen Dowling Botts. Despised love struck not with woe that head of curly knots, nor stomach troubles laid him low, young Stephen Dowling Botts. Oh no, then list with tearful eye, whilst I his fate do tell. His soul did from this cold world fly, by falling down a well. They got him out and emptied him, alas, it was too late. His spirit was gone for to sport aloft in the realms of the good and great. If Emmeline Grangerford could make poetry like that before she was 14, there ain't no telling what she could have done by and by. Buck said she could rattle off poetry like nothing. She didn't ever have to stop to think. He said she would slap down a line, and if she couldn't find anything to rhyme with it, would just scratch it out and slap down another one, and go ahead. She warn't particular. She could write about anything you choose to give her to write about, just so it was sadful. Every time a man died, or a woman died, or a child died, she would be on hand with her tribute before he was cold. She called them tributes. The neighbors said it was the doctor first, then Emmeline, then the undertaker. The undertaker never got in ahead of Emmeline but once, and when she hung fire on her rhyme for the dead, on the dead person's name, which was Whistler. She warn't ever the same after that. She never complained, but she kinder pined away and did not live long. Poor thing. Many's the time I made myself go up to the little room that used to be hers and get out her poor old scrapbook and read in it when her pictures had been aggravating me and I had soured on her a little. I liked all that family, dead ones and all, and warn't going to let anything come between us. Poor Emmeline made poetry about all the dead people when she was alive, and it didn't seem right that there warn't nobody to make some about her now that she was gone, so I tried to sweat out a verse or two myself, but I couldn't seem to make it go somehow. They kept Emmeline's room trim and nice, and all the things fixed in it just the way she liked to have them when she was alive, and nobody ever slept there. The old lady took care of the room herself, though there was plenty of niggers, and she sewed there a great deal and could read her Bible there mostly. Well, as I was saying about the parlor, there was beautiful curtains on the windows, white, with pictures painted on them of castles with vines all down the walls, and cattle coming down to drink. There was a little old piano, too, that had 10 pans in it, I reckon, and nothing was ever so lovely as to hear the young ladies sing "The Last Link is Broken" and play "The Battle of Prague" on it. The walls of all the rooms was plastered, and most had carpets on the floors, and the whole house was whitewashed on the outside. It was a double house, and the big open place betwixt them was roofed and floored, and sometimes the table was set there in the middle of the day, and it was a cool, comfortable place. Nothing couldn't be better, and warn't the cooking good, just bushels of it too,